Horror story from a 24/7 gas station. The fluorescent lights of the Sunoco station hummed their perpetual drone across the empty parking lot, casting harsh white pools onto cracked asphalt that hadn't been repaved since the 90s. Route 9 stretched dark and endless in both directions through the pine barrens of southern New Jersey, and at 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday in October, Marcus Webb was the only living soul for miles who gave a damn about staying awake. He'd been working the graveyard shift at this particular gas station for 8 months now, ever since his construction job dried up and his wife left him for a real estate agent in Cherry Hill. The pay was garbage, but the solitude suited him fine. Most nights brought nothing but the occasional trucker needing diesel and Red Bull, maybe a drunk from one of the shore towns taking the back way home. Marcus had his routine down: stock the coolers at 11, mop at midnight, inventory at 2, then cruise control until dawn. Tonight felt different, though he couldn't say why. The air had weight to it, thick and expectant, like the atmosphere before a summer thunderstorm. But the weather app on his phone showed clear skies, unseasonably warm for mid-October. 68 degrees at almost 3 in the morning. Weird. Monday. Before we continue with Marcus's story, if you're enjoying this tale from the night shift, please hit that subscribe button and drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. I love hearing from viewers all around the world. Now, let's get back to what happened that October night. Marcus was restocking the cigarette display when he heard the bell chime over the entrance. He glanced at the security monitor mounted above the register. A silver Honda Accord had pulled up to pump 3, but the driver was already walking toward the store instead of filling up first. Strange, but not unheard of. People liked to pay inside sometimes, especially the older folks who didn't trust the card readers at the pump. The man who entered looked to be in his early 60s, dressed in a wrinkled button-down shirt and khakis that had seen better days. His face was gaunt, hollow-eyed, with the kind of exhaustion that spoke of weeks without proper sleep rather than just one long night. He moved with the uncertain shuffle of someone not entirely present in their own body. "Help you?" Marcus asked, returning to his post behind the counter. The man's eyes took a moment to focus on him. When they did, Marcus felt an involuntary chill run down his spine. There was something deeply wrong in that gaze, not threatening exactly, but profoundly disturbed, like looking at someone who'd witnessed something they could never unsee. "I need to tell someone," the man said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Before it's too late, before it happens again." Marcus had dealt with his share of tweakers and drunks over the months. This didn't feel like either. "Sir, if you're in some kind of trouble, there's a state police barracks about 15 miles up the road. I can call them if—" "No police!" The man's hand shot out, gripping the counter's edge with white-knuckled intensity. "They won't believe it. Nobody believes it. But I have to tell someone. I have to warn someone." Every instinct Marcus possessed screamed at him to reach for the panic button under the register. Instead, he found himself transfixed by the raw desperation in the stranger's face. "Warn me about what?" The man leaned closer, and Marcus could smell stale coffee and something else underneath, something sour and chemical, like formaldehyde. "This station, this place, it's not what you think it is. Nothing that happens here is what you think it is. Sir, I really think you should—" "My name is Donald Pritchard. I worked here 23 years ago. I worked the night shift, just like you. And I saw things that don't make sense, things that shouldn't be possible." His eyes darted toward the windows, as if checking to see if anything was watching from the darkness outside. It started with the customers who came in after midnight. Always after midnight. Despite his better judgment, Marcus felt curiosity override caution. What about them? They weren't right. Something was wrong with them, with all of them, but I couldn't figure out what at first. Little things. The way they moved, the way they talked, like they were copying human behavior but didn't quite have it down. Donald's voice dropped even lower. And then I started noticing they were the same people, the same exact people, coming in night after night, asking the same questions, buying the same things, acting out the same conversations, like actors following a script. Marcus tried to keep his expression neutral, but his hand was definitely moving toward that panic button now. The guy was clearly having some kind of mental health crisis. "Listen, Mr. Pritchard, maybe you should sit down, and I'll get you some water. You think I'm crazy." Donald's laugh was bitter, hollow. "Of course you do. I thought I was crazy, too. For months I convinced myself I was just stressed, overworked, seeing patterns that weren't there. But then I started writing it down. Every customer, every interaction, every detail, and the pattern was undeniable." He reached into his pocket and Marcus tensed, but the man only pulled out a battered notebook, its pages yellowed and curled with age. He flipped it open, revealing page after page of cramped handwriting, dates and times and descriptions. October 3rd, 1:14 a.m. Woman in red jacket, mid-30s, asks for bathroom key, buys Diet Coke and Marlboro Lights, says, "Thank you, sugar," when leaving. Donald's finger traced down the page. October 4th, 1:14 a.m. Same woman, same jacket, same items. Same words. October 5th, 1:14 a.m. Same woman. October 6th. "Okay, I get it," Marcus interrupted, though his skin was starting to crawl. "Maybe she worked nearby, had a routine. It wasn't just her." Donald's voice rose sharply before he caught himself, glancing again at the windows. It was dozens of them, different people, different times, but all of them repeating. And here's what made me realize something was fundamentally wrong. I checked the receipts. I checked every single receipt from those transactions. He paused, his eyes boring into Marcus. There were no receipts. The register showed the sales, but no receipts printed. And when I checked the inventory the next morning, nothing was missing. The cigarettes were still on the shelf. The sodas were still in the cooler, like the transactions never actually happened. Marcus felt his mouth go dry. He wanted to dismiss this as the ravings of a disturbed man, but something in the specificity of the details, the methodical way Donald presented his evidence, made it harder to simply write off. "So what are you saying? That the customers weren't real?" "I'm saying they were something else, something that mimics reality but isn't quite right, something that exists in this place after midnight." Donald closed the notebook, clutching it to his chest like a talisman. "I kept working here for 3 more months after I figured it out. I was documenting everything, trying to understand what was happening. And then one night, something different happened, something that made me quit and never come back. Despite every rational bone in his body telling him this was insane, Marcus found himself leaning forward. "What happened?" Donald's face went even paler, if that was possible. "I saw myself. At 3:33 a.m. exactly, I looked up at the door and saw myself walk in. Same uniform, same tired expression, everything, and it walked right up to the counter and looked at me and said, 'You need to leave. You're not supposed to see this. You're not supposed to know.'" The temperature in the store seemed to drop 10 degrees. Marcus realized he was holding his breath. I ran. I left everything, my jacket, my wallet, my keys, and I just ran to my car and drove. I called the manager the next day and quit over the phone. I never came back. I never even drove past this place again until tonight. Donald's hands were shaking now, but I've been having dreams. For 23 years, I've been having the same dream, and it's getting stronger. Something is going to happen. Something is coming, and it's going to happen here, soon. I needed to come back. I needed to warn whoever was working here now. Marcus didn't know what to say. The rational part of his brain was screaming that this was all nonsense, that Donald was mentally ill and needed professional help. But another part of him, something more primal and instinctive, was screaming something else entirely. "Mr. Pritchard, I appreciate you coming to tell me this, but..." The lights flickered. Both men froze. The fluorescent tubes overhead stuttered once, twice, then stabilized, but in that brief moment of dimness, Marcus could have sworn the entire store looked different. Wrong. Like a photograph that had been subtly manipulated, where nothing was overtly incorrect but everything felt off. "It's starting," Donald whispered. "Oh God, it's starting already." "What's starting?" Marcus demanded, his hand finally hitting the panic button under the register. Not that it would do much good. The alarm was silent, just sent a signal to the local police, and it would be at least 15 minutes before anyone arrived. Donald was backing toward the door, his eyes wide with terror. "I shouldn't have come back. I shouldn't have—" He stopped mid-sentence, staring at something over Marcus's shoulder. Marcus spun around to look at the security monitors. His blood turned to ice. The parking lot was full of cars. At least 24 vehicles of various makes and models, all parked neatly in the spaces around the pumps. And standing beside each car was a person, all of them perfectly still, all of them facing the store. "That's impossible," Marcus breathed. "They weren't there 30 seconds ago. I would have heard them. I would have seen them pull in." "They don't pull in," Donald said, his voice breaking. "They just appear. And now they're going to come inside one by one, and they're going to act out their little scripts, and you're going to serve them, and nothing you do will make any sense because none of this is real. This place isn't real. Not after midnight. Not at 3:33. Marcus checked his watch. 3:29 a.m. The bell chimed. The first customer walked in, a woman in a red jacket. "Excuse me, hun," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Could I get the bathroom key?" Marcus looked at Donald, but the older man was already gone, the door swinging shut behind him as he fled into the night. Marcus heard his car engine start, tires squealing as he peeled out of the parking lot. The woman in the red jacket tilted her head, still smiling, that wrong smile. "The bathroom key? I really need to use the facilities." With trembling hands, Marcus reached for the key hanging on the pegboard behind him. As he turned back to hand it to her, he noticed her eyes. They were the right color, the right shape, but they didn't move. They stared straight ahead, unblinking, like a doll's eyes. "Thank you, sugar," she said, taking the key. She walked toward the bathroom with mechanical precision, each step exactly the same length as the last. The bell chimed again. A man in a trucker's cap entered. "Pack of Marlboros and a coffee, black," he said, in a flat monotone. Marcus's hands moved on autopilot, pulling the cigarettes from the display, pouring the coffee. When he turned to hand them over, he noticed the man's skin had a waxy quality to it, like latex. The bell chimed. Another customer entered, then another, then another. They came in a steady stream, each one acting out their simple transaction with robotic precision. None of them acknowledged each other, none of them blinked. And when Marcus looked at the register, he saw the transactions ringing up, but the receipt printer remained silent, not producing a single slip of paper. 3:33 a.m. arrived with the fluorescent lights flickering again, longer this time. In the stuttering darkness, Marcus saw the customers freeze mid-motion like mannequins. When the lights stabilized, they resumed their movements as if nothing had happened. His phone was in his pocket. He could call 911. He could call someone, anyone. But his hands felt disconnected from his body, and the thought of speaking seemed impossibly difficult. The stream of customers continued, each one buying something, each transaction adding to a total that meant nothing, because none of this was really happening. The woman in the red jacket emerged from the bathroom, handed him the key, and said, "Thank you, sugar," even though she'd already said it before. She walked out the door, got into her car, and drove away. Except, when Marcus looked at the parking lot on the monitor, her car was still there, and she was standing beside it, facing the store again. Time had lost meaning. Marcus didn't know if minutes or hours had passed. The customers kept coming, kept repeating their scripts. Some of them he recognized now. He'd seen them before on previous nights, though he'd never paid close enough attention to realize they were doing and saying the exact same things each time. How long had this been happening? How long had he been serving these not-quite people without realizing something was fundamentally wrong? The bell chimed again, and Marcus looked up, expecting another scripted customer. Instead, he saw himself. The other Marcus stood in the doorway, wearing the same gas station uniform, the same exhausted expression. But there was something different about him, something slightly off in the proportions, like a photocopy that wasn't quite aligned properly. "You need to leave," the other Marcus said, his voice identical but somehow hollow. "You're not supposed to see this. You're not supposed to know." Marcus tried to speak, but found his voice had abandoned him entirely. The other Marcus walked closer, moving with that same mechanical precision as all the others. "This place serves a purpose. The people who come here after midnight, they're not for you to question. They're not for you to understand. You're just supposed to play your part. You're supposed to serve them and forget. That's how it works. That's how it's always worked." "What are you?" Marcus finally managed to croak out. The thing wearing his face smiled, and in that smile was something ancient and hungry and utterly inhuman. "I'm what happens when you stay too long. I'm what happens when you see too much. I'm the replacement." It reached across the counter, and Marcus saw that its hand wasn't quite right. The fingers were slightly too long, the joints bent at angles that weren't anatomically possible. Marcus stumbled backward, knocking over a display of energy drinks. His mind was screaming at him to run, to get out, to never look back, just like Donald Pritchard had done 23 years ago. But his body felt sluggish, disconnected, as if he were moving through thick syrup. "Don't fight it," the other Marcus said. "It's easier if you don't fight it. Soon you won't remember anything from before. You'll just be part of the pattern, part of the script. It's not so bad, really. You don't feel tired anymore. You don't feel anything anymore." The lights flickered again, and this time when they came back on, there were more of them. More copies of Marcus, standing throughout the store. 5, 6, 7 versions of himself, all slightly wrong, all staring at him with those flat, lifeless eyes. "Which one of us is real?" they asked in unison, their voices creating a discordant harmony. "Are you sure you're the original? Maybe you're just another copy who thinks he's real. Maybe you've always been part of the pattern." Marcus's grip on reality was slipping. The store seemed to stretch and warp around him, the walls breathing, the floor tilting at impossible angles. He could hear Donald Pritchard's words echoing in his mind. "This place isn't real, not after midnight." With the last remnants of his willpower, Marcus lunged for the door. His hands hit the glass and it felt wrong. Too soft, too yielding, like pushing against a membrane rather than solid surface. But it gave way, and he stumbled out into the parking lot. The air outside was thick and cloying, tasting of copper and ozone. The cars were still there, and the people standing beside them all turned to look at him simultaneously. Their faces were blank, featureless masks of flesh, and as he watched, they began to walk toward him with synchronized steps. Marcus ran to his truck, parked on the side of the building. His keys were inside in his jacket pocket, which was still hanging in the back room. Cursing, he spun around, looking for any escape route. The highway stretched dark and empty in both directions, but when he tried to run toward it, his feet wouldn't move. It was as if the parking lot itself had hold of him, keeping him tethered to this cursed place. The blank-faced people were getting closer. Behind them, through the store's windows, he could see the other versions of himself, all pressing against the glass, watching. His phone. He could still call for help. Marcus pulled it from his pocket with shaking hands and dialed 911. The line connected, but instead of a dispatcher's voice, he heard only static, and beneath the static something else. Voices. Hundreds of voices, all whispering the same phrase over and over. "You're part of the pattern now. You're part of the pattern now." The phone slipped from his fingers, clattering to the asphalt. Marcus sank to his knees, his mind fragmenting under the weight of impossible reality. This couldn't be happening. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. But the cold concrete under his knees felt real. The October wind, raising goosebumps on his arms, felt real. The terror flooding his system felt real. The blank-faced people formed a circle around him, and in the center of their ring, the air began to shimmer and distort. Something was coming through, something vast and incomprehensible, something that Marcus's mind couldn't fully process without shattering completely. He squeezed his eyes shut, pressing his palms against his temples, trying to block it all out. This was a nightmare. It had to be a nightmare. He would wake up in his apartment, and this would all be some stress-induced fever dream, and he would call his manager and quit and never think about this place again. But when he opened his eyes, they were still there, all of them, waiting. The shimmer in the air solidified into a form that was almost but not quite human. It towered over him, its proportions wrong, its movements wrong, everything about it fundamentally incorrect, in ways that made his eyes water and his stomach churn. "Why do you resist?" it asked, and its voice came from everywhere and nowhere at once. "This is so much simpler than the alternative. The pain of existing, the burden of consciousness, the weight of memory and regret and loss, we take all of that away. We give you purpose. We give you pattern. We give you peace." Marcus wanted to scream, but no sound would come. His throat had closed up, his vocal cords frozen. "You've already taken the first step," the thing continued. "You've seen behind the curtain. You've perceived the truth. There's no going back from that. The only question now is whether you join us willingly, or whether we have to break you first and reassemble the pieces into something useful." Through the haze of terror, a thought crystallized in Marcus's mind. Donald Pritchard had seen all of this. Donald Pritchard had escaped, which meant escape was possible. He forced his legs to move, pushing himself upright despite the suffocating weight of the thing's presence. The blank-faced people reached for him, but he knocked their hands aside. They felt cold and slightly sticky, like touching raw meat, and ran. Not toward the highway, not toward his truck, but into the pine barrens that stretched dark and tangled behind the gas station, into the wild spaces where human lights and human order had never quite taken hold. Behind him, he could hear them following, not running but walking with that same mechanical precision, never faster but never slower, relentless as tide. The trees closed around him, branches clawing at his face and arms, roots threatening to trip him with every step. He had no idea where he was going, only that he had to keep moving, had to put distance between himself and that place. The forest seemed to go on forever, though logic told him that wasn't possible. Route 9 was only a few hundred yards wide through here, with civilization on either side. But he'd been running for what felt like hours, and he still hadn't broken through to the other side. His lungs were burning, his legs cramping, but terror kept him moving. He could still hear them behind him, that synchronized footfall of dozens of not-quite people getting closer despite his desperate flight. Finally, gasping and sobbing, Marcus burst through a line of trees and found himself on a road. But it wasn't Route 9. It was a smaller road. 2 lanes of cracked pavement with no center line, cutting through the forest in a direction that made no sense relative to where he'd started. And there, in the middle of the road, illuminated by a single flickering streetlight, was a gas station. Marcus's heart sank into his stomach. No, that was impossible. He'd run away from the gas station. He'd put miles between himself and that cursed place. This had to be a different station, just another 24-hour convenience stop along some forgotten Jersey back road. But as he got closer, stumbling forward on legs that barely supported him anymore, he saw the familiar Sunoco sign. The same cracked pavement, the same arrangement of pumps, the same building layout. He'd somehow circled back, or he'd never left at all. The fluorescent lights hummed their perpetual drone. Through the window, Marcus could see himself behind the counter, serving a customer, the woman in the red jacket. "No," he whispered. "No, no, no." The door opened, and another Marcus stepped out, looking at him with weary, sympathetic eyes. "You should have just accepted it," this version said. Fighting only makes it harder. Now you're part of the loop too. Now you're one of the repeating patterns. Every night at 3:33, you'll run into those woods. Every night at 3:47, you'll come back, over and over, forever. Marcus wanted to scream, wanted to fight, wanted to do anything but accept this fate. But as he opened his mouth, nothing came out except that same flat monotone he'd heard from all the others. I need to tell someone, before it's too late, before it happens again. And then he was walking, not by choice, but compelled by forces beyond his understanding, back toward his truck, back to the highway, driving through the dark New Jersey night towards some destination he couldn't control, to warn some other night shift worker about the truth of that place, even though he knew they wouldn't believe him, knew they would think him crazy, knew it wouldn't matter in the end, because the pattern always continued, always repeated, always claimed new victims to add to its endless cycle. The sun was rising by the time Marcus found himself parked outside a different gas station, this one near Toms River, about 40 miles up the coast. He watched through his windshield as the night shift worker locked up and the day shift arrived, the changing of the guard that happened every morning at every gas station in America. He felt hollow inside, scraped out, as if everything that made him human had been removed and replaced with something else. The memories of the night were already fading, becoming dreamlike and distant, though he knew they were real. He knew what he'd seen. He knew what had happened to him. His phone buzzed with a text from his manager. "Where are you? You were supposed to clock out at 6. Everything okay?" Marcus stared at the message, trying to formulate a response, but his fingers wouldn't cooperate. Instead, they opened up the voice recorder app and began playing back a message he didn't remember recording. "My name is Marcus Webb. If you're hearing this, it means I'm already gone. I worked at the Sunoco station on Route 9, mile marker 47, and I saw something there that I can't explain. After midnight, the place becomes something else. The customers aren't real, time doesn't work right, and if you stay too long, if you see too much, it takes you. It makes you part of its pattern. I'm recording this as a warning, but I know it won't matter. The pattern always continues. The pattern always needs more." The recording cut off abruptly, replaced by static and those same whispered voices. "You're part of the pattern now." Marcus closed his eyes. When he opened them again, he was parked outside a different gas station in a different town, with no memory of how he'd gotten there. His phone showed 3 days had passed. 3 days gone, erased, absorbed into whatever that place was. He got out of his truck and walked into the station, drawn by an impulse he couldn't resist. The night shift worker looked up from behind the counter, a young woman with tired eyes and a name tag that read Sarah. "Help you?" she asked. Marcus opened his mouth to speak, to warn her, to tell her everything. But the words that came out weren't his own. "I need to tell someone. Before it's too late. Before it happens again." Sarah's expression shifted from friendly to concerned. "Sir, are you okay? Do you need me to call someone?" "This station," Marcus heard himself say, the words coming from somewhere else, some script he couldn't deviate from. "It's not what you think it is. Nothing that happens here is what you think it is." He pulled out a notebook. When had he gotten a notebook? Filled with pages of cramped handwriting, documenting patterns and repetitions and impossible customers. His handwriting, but he had no memory of writing any of it. "Sir, I think you need to leave," Sarah said, her hand moving towards something under the counter. The panic button. Marcus remembered having the same instinct, remembered pressing it, remembered nothing coming of it because help never arrived in time, not at places like these, not at stations that existed in the liminal spaces between reality and whatever else was out there. "You need to listen," Marcus said desperately, fighting against the script, trying to break through with genuine warning. "After midnight, watch the customers, watch how they move, watch how they repeat. And if you see yourself, if you see your own face walking through that door, run. Run and don't come back. Don't make my mistake. Don't—" The fluorescent lights flickered and everything froze. Marcus found himself standing outside again, back in his truck with no memory of how he'd gotten there. The sun was setting, another day gone. His phone showed 17 missed calls from his manager, 6 from his landlord, 3 from his ex-wife. Messages asking where he was, if he was okay, if he was alive, but he couldn't answer them, couldn't explain. The words wouldn't form. He drove. Through the night, through the Jersey darkness, past gas stations and convenience stores, and all the little outposts of fluorescent light that marked human presence along the endless American highways. And at each one, he felt a pull, a compulsion to stop, to go inside, to deliver his warning to whoever was working the night shift. Most of them thought he was crazy. Some called the police. A few listened, their faces growing pale as he showed them his documentation, as he described the pattern. But it never mattered. The pattern continued, the cycle repeated, days blurred into weeks. Marcus stopped trying to fight it. He slept in his truck when the compulsion released him, ate at diners and fast food joints, used gas station bathrooms to wash up. His life had narrowed to this single purpose: drive, warn, repeat. He was part of the pattern now, just another element in its endless loop. Sometimes he wondered if he'd ever really escaped that first night, or if he was still there, still standing in that parking lot, and everything since had been some kind of hallucination spun by whatever entity inhabited that place. Maybe the real Marcus Webb was serving customers right now, mindlessly going through the motions, while something else wore his face and lived his life. Or maybe there was no real Marcus Webb anymore. Maybe there never had been. Maybe he'd always been part of the pattern, and his memories of a life before, the construction job, the wife, the normal existence, were just implanted backstory, details added to make him feel more real, more human, more believable when he delivered his warnings to the next victim. The thought should have terrified him, but he felt nothing. The hollow space inside him where emotions used to live had been empty for so long now. It was October again. A full year had passed, though Marcus only knew because the date on his phone told him so. He found himself parked outside a gas station on Route 9, mile marker 47. His gas station, the place where it had all started, or ended, or continued in its endless loop. A silver Honda Accord pulled up to pump 3, and Marcus watched as a man got out, gaunt, hollow-eyed, dressed in wrinkled clothes. The man didn't pump gas. He walked straight into the store. Marcus got out of his truck and followed. Inside, the new night shift worker, a kid who couldn't have been more than 22, wearing a name tag that read Tyler, looked up from his phone. "Help you?" The gaunt man gripped the counter. "I need to tell someone, before it's too late, before it happens again." Marcus stood in the doorway, watching the scene play out exactly as it had a year ago. Same words, same desperation, same doomed attempt to break the cycle. Tyler's hand moved toward the panic button. The gaunt man pulled out a notebook. "My name is Donald Pritchard. I worked here. 23 years ago, I worked the night shift, just like you." Marcus turned and walked back outside. The October air was thick and expectant, unseasonably warm. 68 degrees at almost 3 in the morning. He checked his watch. 2:47 a.m. The pattern was starting again. It always started again. Marcus got in his truck and drove away, leaving Tyler to discover the truth on his own, just as Marcus had, just as Donald Pritchard had before him, just as countless others probably had before that. The gas station receded in his rearview mirror, its fluorescent lights humming their eternal drone, waiting for the next person who would stay too long and see too much. Somewhere in the Pine Barrens, in the dark spaces between the scattered lights of civilization, Marcus knew that station wasn't the only one. There were others, dozens, maybe hundreds of these places scattered across America's highways, serving their inexplicable purpose, catching people in their patterns, adding them to the endless loop. He would visit them all eventually. The compulsion would take him to each one, make him deliver his warning, make him try to save people who couldn't be saved, because once you saw the pattern, once you understood what was really happening, you were already part of it. That was the horrible truth Donald Pritchard had discovered. That was the horrible truth Marcus had learned. That was the horrible truth that would be discovered by Tyler and Sarah and whoever came after them. The gas stations weren't traps. They were gathering points, collection centers for something vast and incomprehensible, something that needed people who existed in the liminal spaces, who worked the hours when the world was supposed to be sleeping, who stood in the fluorescent-lit spaces between one day and the next. Marcus didn't know what that something was or what it wanted. He didn't think his human mind could comprehend it, even if someone tried to explain. All he knew was that he was part of it now, serving his function, playing his role in the pattern. The sun was rising again. Another night ending, another day beginning. Marcus pulled into a rest stop and closed his eyes, letting exhaustion finally claim him. In his dreams, he was back behind that counter serving the woman in the red jacket, listening to her say, "Thank you, sugar," in that flat monotone, watching the receipt printer remain silent as the transaction that wasn't really a transaction logged itself in a register that wasn't really registering anything. And in his dreams, he heard the whispered voices, clearer now, speaking words he could almost understand. Every pattern needs its pieces. Every cycle needs its components. Every system needs its servants. You are serving your purpose. You are fulfilling your function. This is what you were always meant to be. When Marcus woke, it was dark again. Always dark again. The cycle never ended. The pattern never broke. He started his truck and pulled back onto the highway, driving through the endless American night, past gas stations and convenience stores and all the little islands of light where people worked jobs they hated for money they needed, never realizing that some of those places were doors to somewhere else, gateways to patterns that would consume them if they stayed too long or looked too close. His phone rang. The caller ID showed unknown. Marcus answered anyway. "Thank you for your service," a voice said, neither male nor female, neither young nor old, neither human nor entirely something else. The pattern continues. The cycle endures. Your warnings ensure the next generation will come. Your story ensures the pattern will never be forgotten. You have served your purpose well. The line went dead. Marcus drove on through the darkness, past exit signs and mile markers, past the scattered evidence of human civilization clinging to the edges of an indifferent world. Somewhere ahead, another gas station waited, its fluorescent lights humming, its night shift worker unaware of the role they were about to play. And Marcus would stop there eventually, compelled by forces he couldn't resist, to deliver his warning to someone who wouldn't believe him, to show them his documentation that wouldn't convince them, to watch as they made the same choices he'd made, saw the same things he'd seen, became the same thing he'd become. The pattern continued. The pattern always continued. And in a gas station on Route 9, at mile marker 47, Tyler was restocking the cigarette display when he heard the bell chime over the entrance. He glanced at the security monitor. A car he hadn't noticed before was parked at pump 3, and someone was walking toward the store instead of pumping gas first. Strange, but not unheard of. The fluorescent lights hummed their perpetual drone, casting harsh white pools onto everything they touched, washing out color and detail and humanity, reducing the world to simple shapes and shadows. It was 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday in October, and Tyler was about to learn that some patterns once perceived could never be unseen. The cycle turned. The pattern continued. And somewhere on America's highways, in the spaces between destinations, in the hours between yesterday and tomorrow, Marcus Webb drove on through the endless night, serving his purpose, fulfilling his function, warning people who couldn't be saved about places that couldn't be escaped, because that was his role now. That was what he'd become. A story told to night shift workers who wouldn't believe it. A warning delivered to people who wouldn't heed it. A piece of the pattern, playing his part in the endless cycle. The gas stations waited. They always waited, and they always would.